We've prepared this video series to provide you some guidance on how to plant native grasses and how to do it successfully the first time you try. This series provides some practical guidance in a convenient format that should help you avoid a lot of the common pitfalls that folks fall into when they try to establish these grasses. Now, we've arranged it in 3 segments, or 3 chapters maybe I should say, and within each one there's information that's important to getting this process done successfully. The first chapter has 6 segments that deal with steps that you need to take before you plant. It's really important that you pay close attention to these steps. If you take shortcuts here, you're going to create problems for yourself. In fact, most failed stands that I've seen are a result of someone trying to take one of those shortcuts in this part of the process. The second chapter has 2 segments that deal with the actual planting process, getting the seed into the ground. And finally, the third chapter has 3 segments that address steps that you need to take after the seed is in the ground. And keep in mind, just because you've planted that seed, you're not done with the process. Paying attention to these last few steps is really important to ensuring that your planting project is successful. Now, if you need additional information, go to the web link there on your screen and you can find additional information, particularly our SP 731 extension publication series that provides information on planting and other aspects of managing native grasses. And there's also a lot of other information on that web page that should be helpful as you try to use these native grasses in your forage program. And of course, you can always reach out to your county agent. I'm standing here in mid-June in a well-established stand of big bluestem, and as you can see, it produces an abundant amount of high-quality, fine-leaved forage that produces excellent gain on cattle with very little input and is very drought-tolerant. Taken all together, that tells us this is a great complement to our cool season grasses here in the tall fescue belt. The challenge, of course, is getting this established. How do we do that? With all native grasses and all perennial grasses, it's essential that we have a high quality seed bed and do an excellent job of competition control. If we can take care of those 2 things, we can have a very high probability of establishing stands like you see here. When you plan to establish native grasses, one of the first choices you will have to make is picking a site. If you have the option, choose fields where past management has suppressed weeds. For example, production of row crops such as soybeans, corn, and cotton over several years can lead to reduced weed populations. New ground, land that has been recently cleared, also typically has limited weed pressure and is a good option as well. On the other hand, hay and pasture fields can be much more of a problem because of their well-developed weed seed banks. In pastures and hay fields where Bermuda grass has encroached, you will need to use more aggressive control measures, or in more extreme cases, consider alternate sites. So let's look at some of these options. In recent years, the way we've planted soybeans is using very often Roundup Ready material, which allows us to suppress weeds throughout the growing season. Because of that, it makes an excellent environment to plant native grasses. So we can see these soybeans here are really very clean, not a lot of weed pressure. And so if you know ahead of time that you want to plant a particular field to native grasses and you have the opportunity to use a rotation of soybeans, it can be an excellent tool to help clean up the weeds in that field. Conversely, if you have a field that's already in soybeans and you're thinking about putting it into pasture, that's an excellent choice because of how clean the fields typically are. If you do decide to plant native grasses following soybeans, you need to be aware that there are some special weed problems associated with glyphosate resistance that you're going to have to be prepared to deal with. For instance, mare's tail, pigweeds, ladina clover, or white clover are all weeds that have fairly high resistance to glyphosate and can persist following even several years of soybean production. So when you plant following soybeans, be prepared ahead of time to deal with these weeds. Site selection for establishing native grasses is very important, particularly trying to find places where there's low weed pressure. But if you're trying to convert an old pasture, one that's kind of worn out like what you see here in front of me, then you don't have much choice in the matter. You have to deal with the weed pressure that's in front of you. And again, for old pastures, this is a very common, very typical problem. We have common Bermuda grass in here, we have goosegrass, we have cuckleburr, we have spiny amaranth, and no doubt dozens of other weed species that once we kill this current sod are going to express themselves. So it's absolutely critical when doing pasture conversion to be prepared ahead of time to do weed control that allow you to be successful when the time comes to actually put the drill in the ground. The Bermuda grass, things like Johnson grass, goosegrass, the broadleaf species, all can best be controlled late in the growing season before a frost, so August and September. Don't wait till the spring you're actually going to plant to address these weed problems. They need to be controlled now. A typical recommendation for controlling perennial warm season grasses is to apply glyphosate at 2 quarts per acre in late summer, and preferably a second application before frost. Additional treatment will be needed the next spring prior to planting. Similarly, perennial cool season grasses are also best controlled toward the end of their active growing season. In the case of cool season grasses, though, this will be more like mid-October to mid-November, depending on the fall. And like warm season perennials, you must plan for more than one round of treatment. For switchgrass and gamagrass, which are not tolerant to the pre-emergent herbicide imazapic, you have 2 choices. First, plant before early April to ensure you are well ahead of the germination of summer annuals. This will give the natives a competitive advantage, but will require moisture and temperature conditions during early April that enable timely germination of the native grasses. A second alternative is to wait until the annual grasses have germinated, typically by mid-May, and then kill these seedlings by either spraying or disking. You may need to repeat this process if annual grass pressure is particularly heavy. Additional rounds of annual grass control may delay planting natives, though, which then becomes a trade-off with soil moisture concerns later in the summer. Now, we've talked about establishing native grasses in old pastures. We've talked about establishing them in crop fields. I want to talk now about really the worst case scenario, and that is common Bermuda grass. So I'm standing in a pasture that was planted several years ago to native grasses. Up here on the hill behind me, you can see that we got a good stand. On the other hand, right where I am, we have almost exclusively Bermuda grass. Here's a native grass plant that made it through, some Indian grass, but overwhelmingly this is common Bermuda grass. The problem is it is a tough competitor, and native grass seedlings have a very hard time making it past common Bermuda grass, and this is a stark reminder of that reality. Now, some people say because of the challenge of planting into Bermuda grass, you ought to avoid these fields entirely and select other sites, and that certainly is not bad advice. But if for some reason you do want to plant that field, the key thing that you have to do to be successful in controlling Bermuda enough to get native grasses established properly is you're going to have to start ahead of time the summer before, and you're going to have to do repetitive treatments of fairly high rates of herbicides. So for instance, about 4 quarts of glyphosate per acre plus about a pint of clethodim per acre. And doing that in, say, August, early October, and again the following spring. Don't be lulled to sleep by the idea that the field looks brown and you think you've killed it. You must be prepared to hit it multiple times if you're going to control this very, very aggressive weed species. Although no-till establishment of natives is commonly recommended, conventional seed beds also work well. There are circumstances where this approach can even be preferable. For example, producers who want to avoid spraying or where the field to be planted is particularly rough and needs to be smoothed. It is critical, though, that conventional seed beds are not coarse textured or cloddy. They must be fine textured to allow for optimal seed-soil contact. Conventional seed beds also must be firm so that seeding depth remains shallow. One advantage of a conventional seed bed is that thatch will be eliminated, enabling improved seed placement, germination, and early seedling development. Now that you have considered where to plant native grasses, you need to select the species and varieties best suited to your site. Fortunately, native grasses are very adaptable. After all, they are native to our region and can do well on a wide range of sites from wet-natured to well-drained. The important thing is to select the species or variety that best fits your production needs and that is appropriate for your site. Native grasses can be successfully planted over a wide range of dates, but will not germinate until soil temperatures have warmed, typically by late April in the Mid-South. This wide planting window gives you the flexibility to ensure that you have a high-quality seed bed and excellent competition control before planting. A 1 or 2 week delay in planting is by far better than a rush planting job into poor quality seed beds or one where weed pressure has not been adequately addressed. Because of lower seeding rates and cheaper seed, switchgrass is the most cost-effective option, while eastern gamagrass is the most expensive in terms of seed cost. Pure live seed, commonly abbreviated PLS, is an important idea when planting native grass seed. Pure live seed refers to the part of the seed that you are purchasing that is actually germinable, viable seed, and it basically accounts for other material in there that's not contributing to the stand. It's commonly calculated using the formula that you see there on your screen. Now, the percent germ is made up of seed that is actually will germinate immediately on planting, plus seed that once stratified will also germinate and contribute to the stand. But remember, that dormant seed may not germinate right away, and if you plant it during warm weather when there's no opportunity for stratification, that dormant seed may not germinate until the following year. So it's real important to pay attention to that component that's listed as dormant or hard or firm seed. But when you combine the immediately germinable seed, quick germ, with the dormant seed, that adds up to your germination percentage, and then you multiply that times the percent purity. And purity is simply the seed less things that are impure. So inert matter, sometimes you get some chaff in there, but it also could be weed seed and other crop seed. So those are deducted from the percent purity, which starts at 100. So this information can all be taken right off a seed tag or even the shipping slip that you get when you order your seed from a vendor. That provides all of that information. What we're going to do is we're going to show you the seed tag that you see on your screen now, and we're going to walk you through those calculations so you can figure out how to calculate pure live seed for yourself for any given seed lot you may have. So let's run through an example using the seed tag that you see there on your screen. First number I want you to pay attention to is the germination, 61%. Second number is the dormant seed, which is 25%. And recall, that's good seed, but it just needs to be stratified to germinate. The third number we want to see on there is the 1.16% inert matter. And recall, this is simply material that's not seed. It's chaff, miscellaneous material that's in the seed bag. And then the fourth category we're going to call weed seed, and even though on this tag that's broken out into weed and other crop seed, we're just going to combine them for simplicity to 0.05%. So we'll take those four numbers and use those to calculate our pure live seed. First, we'll simply add the germinable seed, the quick germ, 61%, to the firm or dormant seed, 25%, to get 86%. And then to calculate purity, we'll start off at 100% and deduct the 1.16% inert matter and the 0.05% weed seed, which gives us a 98.79% purity. The next step is that we simply multiply those two numbers, 86% and 98.79%, together to come up with our pure live seed percentage, which in this case is 84.96. Now, the way we use this pure live seed number is we use it to adjust our planting rate. So for instance, since we're using a switchgrass example, and our normal recommended planting rate for switchgrass is 6 pounds per acre, we would simply take that 6 pounds and divide it by the 0.8496, which gives us 7.06 bulk pounds of seed that we'll need to plant per acre. So the material that's in that seed bag, we need 7.06 pounds per acre to achieve our 6 pound per acre pure live seed seeding rate. So really pretty straightforward, and I want to point out that there at the bottom of the tag, they've already calculated this for you, and most seed vendors do that anyway, but we wanted to walk you through the process so you'd be able to understand how to arrive at it if it's not printed on that bag, and so that you'd understand what went into it. Excessive thatch in a no-till field can be a problem for establishing native grasses. Number one, sometimes it's too thick to cut through and get proper seed soil contact, seed placement. Number two, it can inhibit the germinating seedlings. And so we want to make sure that we don't have excessive thatch on the field. That can be handled by earlier grazing, mowing, and baling the material, perhaps even prescribed fire. The amount of thatch that's on this field that you see down here is not really a concern. This isn't what I would call a heavy thatch, and so we're okay to work our no-till drill through it. If you look over here where the drill is passed, you can see exactly what I'm talking about. Right here in this particular furrow, we've done a very good job with this drill, with its cutting disc or trash plow, of cleaning up that thatch, and you can see a nice open furrow there where we're able to get the seed directly in contact with the mineral soil. So this amount of thatch, not a problem. This looks real good here, and actually this will help end up insulating the soil and retaining some moisture. One important thing we want to do when we're no-till drilling native grasses is we want to make sure the drill is set up properly. In other words, we want to make sure we're getting through whatever thatch is there, and we're getting enough penetration into the soil for good seed placement. We don't want to be too deep, we don't want to be too shallow. We're looking at about an 1/8 to 1/4 of inch depth. So we have just started in this field, and we're going to adjust the depth on this drill to make sure we get proper seed placement. But a couple things I want you to see here. In this particular drill row, you can see where the seed has been falling, and we can see some seed up on the surface of the ground. And with native grasses, we're not too concerned about that. In fact, we want to see a little bit of seed on the surface of the ground, because that sort of reinforces to us that we're planting shallow. Right here we've got our double disc opener, and in between it, directly in between it, is our furrow. And in that furrow we can see that right now we are really only about 1/4 inch deep, and I'm looking at seed down in there. And of course this packer wheel behind it is going to help bury that seed just a little bit. But this is probably about right what we're looking for this native grass seed. Again, it's a small seed and we don't need it very far into the ground. If it's a small seed too deep in the ground, it doesn't have the energy reserves to push up through all that soil when it germinates. So again, we're looking for very shallow seed placement, about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch. Some people ask me, why not just sow it? And part of the answer is that yes, you can sow this seed, but the advantage of using the drill is you get a little more consistent seed soil placement. That seed is down into a little bit of dirt and has good contact with that soil and can preserve some moisture. If we sow, we generally want to cover it somehow with a cultipacker or very light disking perhaps. But I prefer to use a drill because again, more consistent seed soil contact. You can see the seed along that drill row right there that's on the surface, and that's a good thing because it tells us we're seeding shallow. But you also see where just a little further along there the seed starts to disappear, which means it's underground. And if we kind of work into that soil, there's two things I want you to notice. One of them, there's a seed we just uncovered, and if we're lucky enough, we'll uncover a few more under here. But you see how fine textured that soil is, and the great thing about that is, even though it's a little on the dry side, there's a couple more seeds that just came up, is that really fine textured soil, almost like talcum powder, guarantees us that we have just exceptional seed soil contact. And then the final thing I'll point out where Norman has uncovered some of that seed is how shallow it is that he's bringing it up. It's about 1/4 inch deep. I don't think it's any deeper than that. And so we got shallow seeding, and we got a really fine soil that's packed in snug around it with a lot of down pressure on the packer wheels that ensures we got just exceptional seed soil contact. And when it comes to planting native grass seed, that's the name of the game. What I want to show you here, this native grass seed tends to be chaffy and not as clean as some of the other kinds of pasture seed that we're used to planting. And so sometimes we have to be careful in terms of what we put this through in type of drill. This particular drill here is a no-till drill. It happens to be a true-axe drill, but a lot of the features on it are going to be somewhat similar among drills. A couple things I want to show you. First of all, this box right here is what we call a chaffy seed or native seed box. And the important thing I want you to see here is these agitator wheels. We've talked about how fluffy that seed is, and so it can be difficult to pass through a conventional drill sometimes, but therefore we use this box because we've got these agitators that can keep that seed flowing. The good news is, even though this seed is somewhat chaffy, we can actually run it through this back box right here. And this is just a conventional box. This is what we plant wheat, soybeans, tall fescue, orchard grass with. It still has agitators, but you can see how less aggressive they are. We've stressed the importance of advanced weed control for establishing natives. Fortunately, when it comes to big blue stem, little blue stem, Indian grass, side oats, all of those species, we have a herbicide tool that works very well for us. It's a Mazapic, which is sold as either Plateau, Panoramic, or Journey. Same active ingredient, 3 different labels. That product is actually very, very useful to us when we're establishing these grasses because we can spray it after we drill, and it's active in the soil and suppresses weed development for a number of weeks following application. So what I want to show you here in front of me is a group of seedlings. And you can see big blue stem, Indian grass, a number of seedlings here in front of me. Very, very clean stand, very good looking seedlings. And here we just have a small patch where when the tractor turned, it got skipped. And this patch right here is full of goosegrass, which is very common in these fields, as well as foxtail. What you can see is the dramatic difference in weed pressure from some of these summer annual grasses that we have where the herbicide was not applied compared to where it was applied. And so going forward, once the stand is established, we'll be able to see this weak spot in the stand for years to come where the native grass will be thinner because of that weed competition. What I wanted to show you here is all the competition. You see all these little grass seedlings germinating. A lot of that I believe is crabgrass, some of it may be goosegrass. More importantly, I want to point out this right here, this little sprig of Bermuda grass, common Bermuda grass, that's coming back from our competition control program. So we want to kill this. Here's a little bit more right there. So behind the drill, in addition to spraying Plateau, we are going to spray 2 quarts of glyphosate to try to clean all that up. Native grass seedlings do not require high fertility. In fact, where nitrogen levels are high, weed competition will be greater. As long as phosphorus and potassium are not deficient and acidity is not excessive, establishment of native grasses will not be hampered. Some native grasses, notably eastern gamagrass and some varieties of switchgrass, have inherently high dormancy rates. You need to be aware of this possibility and be prepared to address it. There are several effective strategies for dealing with dormancy, including purchasing seed that has been stratified or is after ripened, or by planting high dormancy seed during late winter. I want to talk a little bit about the development of native grass seedlings. There's a few things that are really important to understand. First of all, native grass seed is very slow to germinate. And this is true of most warm season perennial grasses. It's not just natives, but Bermuda grass, for instance, is very slow to germinate. So typically we don't expect to see these seedlings germinate really for about 21, even 24 days. So this field that we're looking at here was planted on about June 20th, which is a little on the late side, but it's fine. And you can see some small seedlings right here. There's one right there in front of my finger. Here's another one. Here's another one. There's another one. And today is August 24th. So some of these seedlings have laid in the ground now for about 60 days before germinating, 50 days anyway. Some of these seedlings here are probably only about 2 weeks old. Some of them may be a little bit older than that. But what I wanted to stress is that germination is slow and development of the seedling is initially very slow. These, again, are very small seedlings, but they are continuing to pop up, and we'll probably see germination for the next 2 or 3 weeks. Now, the other thing that's important to understand about native grass seedlings is the rate at which they develop. So these individual seedlings here have not gone through the process of tillering. Now, to show you tillering, I want to show you this seedling right here. It's an Indian grass seedling, and it has begun to tiller. In other words, this is a single plant that has come from a single seed, and these individual stems that are starting to break off and come up on their own here. Here's another example. Here's a big blue stem plant that now has 3 or 4 or 5 tillers on it. So once these plants begin this process of tillering, which very often happens at about 6 weeks of age, 8 weeks of age, they go through a physiological transformation where they develop what we call adventitious roots. These real small seedlings that I've been showing you, like this one over here, has a single taproot. But these adventitious roots are spreading out underneath this larger plant. Once a seedling reaches that stage, a couple of really important things happen. Number one, its ability to survive dry conditions is much improved. These little seedlings right here could die during a drought. This seedling right here could go all summer without another drop of rain and do just fine. The other important thing is that this seedling here, if winter dormancy started tomorrow, would be absolutely fine. It would survive the winter. These small seedlings right here are too small to survive the winter. They need to reach this stage to be able to do that. This blue stem seedling is large enough to survive the winter. The other important thing that happens with these adventitious roots in the tillering is the plant develops a much greater tolerance of herbicide application. So for instance, this plant right here, we could spray 2,4-D, we could put an additional application of imazapic, we could spray Cimarron, we could spray a number of different herbicides over this plant and not worry about hurting it. These plants right here are still fairly vulnerable to herbicides, and we have to be very cautious in applying a herbicide to a seedling that small. One other consideration about spraying with herbicides during the seedling stage is that some herbicides will suppress germination of the seed. And so at that situation, there may be a number of other seedlings that could yet germinate and help fill in this stand, that are not going to be able to germinate once we've applied certain herbicides. So we need to be cautious in terms of those applications, but the important thing is that these larger seedlings that have already tillered can easily withstand the herbicide, depending on which herbicide it is. They're ready to survive winter and they can survive drought. In other words, they're becoming very well established and well on their way to being part of a successful stand. No matter how good your advanced weed control is when you plant native grasses, once you've planted, you can often have weed problems emerge. You can have things come on that create a challenge for your native grass seedlings. So right here, for instance, we've got a pretty abundant weed canopy. You can see it's, I don't know, thigh deep or taller, and it's dense enough that it's going to create a problem for native grass seedlings remaining viable and continuing to grow and survive. And so the key is during the summer, we've got to be prepared to deal with these kinds of problems that maybe won't always come, but are very common. So we've got this really thick canopy of weeds here, at least thick in places. And here's what I want to show you is here are some native grass seedlings that are at this point probably, you see this one here, Indian grass. Over here we got another little fella, probably Indian grass again, and over here a third one. So we've got these three little native grass seedlings under here that are maybe, I don't know, 6 weeks old, I'd guess. Not much older than that. And they have a tremendous weed canopy over them. So the key thing is during the seedling year, we've got to do something about this. We want those small seedlings to get ample sunlight. And so what we've asked this farmer to do is come in here and clip this weed canopy up above the seedlings. So that seedling's up maybe 10, 12 inches tall. We're going to set the mower right about here. Knock this down so those seedlings can get daylight. Now these native grass seedlings are still small, just like the ones I just showed you earlier. But what I want to show here is that the weeds, even though they're still present, they're all around me, they're not forming a canopy over these seedlings. So if we had an entire field that looked like this, some weeds, some seedlings, more seedlings here, there, here, I wouldn't be too concerned about controlling these weeds other than perhaps keeping the weeds from going to seed in the case of annuals like these. But it's not a problem in terms of competition at this stage of the game. So we got to think about thresholds for control when we're facing seedling year weed problems. And as long as those seedlings are getting ample sunlight, they'll be fine and there's no need to do any additional work.
Clipping or grazing are normally the preferred options for seedling year weed control, but there are some herbicide options that can be used without injury to the seedlings. Some, such as imazapic, 2,4-D, and the combination of metsulfuron and chlorsulfuron can be applied to relatively small seedlings, but others, such as aminopyralids and triclopyr, should only be applied on very well-established seedlings, those that have an abundance of large tillers.
Grazing can be a good tool also to use for weed control in seedling stands, but there's a couple key points you have to remember. First of all, the weed you're trying to control has got to be palatable. It's got to be something that cattle want to eat. So vegetative stage crabgrass or Johnson grass, perfect time to use cattle. If those species have gotten mature or you have unpalatable things like foxtail or goosegrass, it's not going to work so well. Regardless, if you're going to use cattle for weed control, always put a pretty high stocking rate out there that can control the problem in about 24 to 48 hours. We don't want to be out there longer than that. And finally, when the cattle are out there, be sure and pay a little bit of attention to be sure they're not focusing on the native grass seedlings themselves, but rather on the weeds. And if they're starting to bother the seedlings, go ahead and pull the cattle out at that point. Here we're looking at this year's seedling stand. It's a mixture of big blue stem Indian grass, side oats. What I wanted to show you though is what is an acceptable plant population for a native grass seeding for forage production. So I've marked off a square yard here from in front of my knee to here, and it goes back up in there. And in that square yard, so 9 square feet, we've got about 45 seedlings, or about 5 seedlings per square foot. So that is a very well stocked stand. In fact, what we always tell folks is about 1 plant per square foot is an adequate and in fact desirable production stand. And let me show you something. So here I've got an individual seedling. That seedling at maturity is going to fill up an area at least this big around. Same thing with all these others. So in fact, these plants will barely have enough room to grow in here if they all survive. So even if that looks a little sparse to you or looks a little bare to you, that isn't absolutely acceptable. In fact, that's a trophy seedling stand right there at 5 plants per square foot. I want to show you a little bit lower density, and we're going to compare that. This square yard right here only has about 1 plant per square foot, or about 10 plants in the square yard. So a lot fewer plants than the 45 we just showed you, but once again, this is a fully stocked stand. So when each one of these plants reaches maturity and fills up, there's not really going to be any space in here, and we're going to have a level of production that is about as high as the acre will give us, given that kind of stocking. This plot right here only has about 4 plants per square yard, so less than a plant per 2 square feet. That's kind of a threshold for us. Below that, we really think that we're starting to see a negative impact on yield. While at 1 plant per square foot, if we gain additional plants, we're not gaining additional yield. We've hit a flat line in terms of yield. Between a plant per 1 square foot and a plant per 2 square feet, we do see a little drop off in yield. Not enough where I would bother replanting the stand though. And again, as these individual plants fill in, what you're going to see is you've got pretty darn good coverage of this square yard. And so I think it's going to be reasonably satisfactory and at a threshold above which I really wouldn't bother to reseed. Now, if we get below this level, then we need to think about reseeding or overseeding. Establishing native grasses can be challenging. We know that. The weather is certainly a problem, as it is with any kind of planting exercise, and really most of the failures that I've seen through the years have something to do with either too much rainfall, which produces too much weed pressure, or drought conditions. But if you pay attention to the guidelines we've given you in this video series, our experience has been that you'll be somewhere between 80, even 95% chance of success, weather notwithstanding, on your first planting attempt. But the key again is you've got to pay attention to these details. And we're just going to review real quickly. So before planting, there's several steps that you've got to take. Be sure and select sites with low weed pressure. Secondly, be diligent in controlling the weeds that are there ahead of time. Also, select native grass species and varieties that are adapted to the site. And be sure you have a real good, high-quality seed bed. Then when you actually plant, be sure and plant shallow, small seed, shallow seeding. If you have high dormancy seed, be prepared to address that ahead of time. And if you have species that are tolerant of a masopic, take advantage of that tool and apply it after you plant. And then following planting, be aggressive on weed control, stick with it, and don't give up too quickly on stands that don't look very vigorous. As long as you have a plant per square foot, you should be in great shape. And finally, 12 months after planting, normally you're in a position to go ahead and start grazing. A good stand of native grasses can produce a large volume of high quality forage and persist for many years. Combined with its drought resiliency and low input requirements, this makes for a pretty attractive tool for summer grazing. Again, we hope this guidance has helped you and will get you to a successful stand of native grasses the first time you try. For further information, visit the website indicated there on your screen or contact your local extension agent. There's a lot of materials at that web page, and your extension agent will be happy to work with you in trying to work through some of the challenges you may face in establishing these grasses. We appreciate you joining us and hope you've enjoyed this series. Thank you.